Susan Gunter is an emeritus professor of English who studied poetry with James Dickey. Her poetry has been published in the US, in the Atlanta Review, Louisville Review, Patterson Review, Poet Lore, and dozens of other journals, as well as in Bulgaria, England, Montenegro, and Sweden. Her poetry reviews have appeared in American Arts Quarterly, Crab Creek Review, the Harvard Review, and other journals. As a Fulbright scholar, Susan taught poetry in the Balkans on 3 occasions, mentoring writers there. This past year, she won 2nd place in the California State Poetry Society. Please welcome Susan Gunter.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Sandy. Sandy, thank you so much. The work you do for poetry, and thank you everyone for coming. This first poem was out in Patterson Review last spring. This is the one poem I'll read about about current issues, and then I'm going to move back into one of my main subjects, which is the place where I grew, a small town where I grew up in Pennsylvania. This poem, though, when I was younger in the 1970s, I went to Georgia and I worked in a program called Aid to Newly Desegregated Schools when they first integrated the schools there. And I spent a lot of time in the African-American community and homes, various businesses, and got to know that community well. Then 2 years ago, I was back east for a wedding, and I took an Amtrak train up through the East Coast, going through these small towns, and it just struck me. I was taking these notes as I was going along. This was one. Most of my poems are very hard for me to write. This one was easy, but I realized how little it had changed in the 40-some years since I had worked in that area. And by the way, the reference, at one point we go through the town of Wilson, but then I refer to Warren Wilson, which is a college in the area, and they have a very famous MFA program in poetry, and I think most of you know that. But okay, riding Amtrak, Cary, North Carolina to Alexandria, Virginia. My eyes scan the wayside like vultures, waiting to pick the bones of the dead. Seeing the cruelty of trees leaning into one another, because some of us bear weight, some of us are the weight. Other trees standing upright, muzzle loading rifles, sentinels keeping the watch over ruined dreams. That pigment should make such a difference when it's poured over skin. Passing TW's Antique Mall, one erect black man standing at an angle to an old white man leaning on a cane. No eye contact. We're in Selma, but it's not Alabama. In the church, always the church. Or it's the Wilson Railway Station, where a pack of 6 young men idles at its side, one in an orange hoodie, all in earbuds. No full employment here in Wilson. While at Warren Wilson, other unemployeds write poems about these 6 they will never read because they can't read, that is. And oh my Lord, this country's rotten to the core. We're sharecropping the world. Bingo, you lose. It's the lottery of life. This is no utopia, buddy, just a great dismal swamp where water snakes spawn and no birds sing. And oh, gentle Jesus, that junkyard of cars stretches out to the crack of doom. Mary Sabat, Mother of God, be with us now and at the hour of our death. Okay, now I'm going to move into one of my main subjects. I grew up in a very small town in Pennsylvania, and I lived in my great-grandfather's house. We were a working class family. My great uncle and his family lived next door. I had relatives all around. Okay, this first one is kind of an introduction to the place. Over the village. I am one of those women in a Chagall mural, flying over bright rooftops, except my palette is darker. I look down at my mother's twisted, skinny leg, her incestuous cousin love, mad uncle gone blackberrying, suicides here, alcoholics there, detritus piling up in a rat's nest of Swedish relatives. I sail over them, conjuring up the magical parts of my childhood that happen even in families that eat their children. My doll's house made of cardboard and wallpaper scraps. The watercress stream bubbling in the woods. Pitting cherries with a curved hairpin. Finding 7-leaf clovers. Sawing on my fiddle as doves fly up from the moon. Flying, flying away. Okay, this next one was out in Emrys last spring. My grandmother lived in the house with us the time I was growing up, and she was the seamstress in this little town. And she lost it. She got pregnant late in life. I think Grandma was 43, but she lost that last child to pneumonia at 11 months. Stitching a mourning garment for Carl Eva Robb, 1931 to 1932. She chose from the fabrics in her bureau, bolts of chenille furred like caterpillars, gold-figured brocades, woolen bises, watered silks as soft as birds' wings. She measured the yards, hand to nose, pinked the bombazine's edges, no time to finish her seams, mashed the notches on the breast, wound her bobbin in black. Thread snaking through the take-up arm, her foot pumped the treadle harder, faster, needle flashing in and out of cloth, her thoughts unraveling in her head. In the crib by her bed, still, silent, no gasping cry or shallow breath, no small form shivering, convulsing, only a lily, his raiment bathed in light. This next one, Sestina for Esther, was out in Poet Laureate sometime in the 1990s. It's being, I hope, translated into Italian right now for an anthology of Sestinas a poet is doing there. And I know, but I just got an email from him how hard it is to translate these. And I know most of you know this too, but it's a 12th century Provençal verse form. Troubadours sang these. These were sung, and there's 6 stanzas with 6 lines each. But the end words in each of the 6 lines in the first stanza repeat in a certain mathematical order in the next stanzas. It usually ends too with a tercet, where 2 of the 6 words are repeated in each of the 3 lines, but I didn't do that one. So this is called Sestina for Esther. The first thing that I remember is a house. Curved sunbursts circled the long porch, and lilacs shaded the sweet gnarled garden. At night, the house set free its ghosts, so I hid beneath the covers, keeping still. They breathed so hard, I thought they were in pain. The old ones in the rooms knew about pain. They said in the end, it comes to every house. They said I'd learn someday, but still, I wouldn't believe them. I read on the porch fairy stories whose endings were free of ghosts, whose journeys took me to a far enchanted garden. At twilight, catching fireflies in the garden, I'd put them in a jar. Was there pain for them, or were they invincible, like ghosts? After the stars came out, I went into the house, leaving the mayonnaise jar on the porch. In the morning, all the fireflies were still. Mason jars lined the cellar shelves, distilled brandy, cherries, spiced peaches from the garden. Against the stone wall, the striped canvas porch swing rested from summer storms. Discarded pain remedies were thrown beneath the stairs. The house swayed above those restless, moaning ghosts. I wish I'd stopped dreaming about those ghosts. I wish my mother were still in her kitchen, baking bread in the house, canning the wealth of her late summer's garden. I wish she had withstood the pain in her head that made her jump from a beam on the porch. All their warnings came true on the porch, and then I knew what the old ones meant. The ghosts had condemned her to a twilight world of pain. After she jumped, all their voices were still. Weeds choked her yellow roses in the garden, and the white paint peeled from the house. Okay, this next one, if I can say it, an Eisteddfod Fod Prize. It's a Welsh thing for best lyric poem. I think that year was 1997. August 10th, 1995. No one kept me from picking blackberries that clear, sunlit August morning. No one stopped me or called my name when I stepped from the small cement porch ringed with morning glories and portulaca, the small white dog running ahead of me toward old man Gajowski's field. Gajowski was dead now, but I knew him long ago when he was the janitor at the Polish club and his daughter Stella married my Uncle Paul. Every Friday night he stood at the entry to the club, drunk and singing, sometimes in broken English, sometimes in Polish. I can see his small, crooked body still. But that was 1959 when I was someone else, with no thought that I would ever leave this small town with its muddy brown river, oil slicked, flowing through its center. I followed the dog up the sloping hill, past old Gajowski's pigsty, a pile of odorless rocks and bricks, ancient straw moldering in the cool air, past his faded barn, its double doors crossed with gray splintered wood, past the old fallow apple trees, bent and heavy, their small windfall apples with soft brown rotten spots dotting their green translucent skin. Was my skin green too that morning, green with the sickly pallor of days spent in the hospital, green from the nights without sleep? But I was alive, and I reached the field below the barn, the dog still ahead of me. 2 rabbits, small and brown, sprang from the bushes fringing the field. The dog started after them. This was the place I'd longed all my life to reach, the time and place where everything coalesced, as if I'd been destined from birth to come here, picking blackberries in the warm sun while my father breathed slow, shallow breaths into a respirator, making the float inside the plastic jar rise a few scant inches at a time. Yellow jackets swarmed in and out of the shade while I wandered along the field's periphery, snatching ripe blackberries and piling them in my open palm, sometimes mistaking the yet unripened red berries for raspberries, till I tasted one and found it bitter. All that I'd lost there in that town, in that other life, all that I lost suddenly rushed back, and I knew that even those losses hadn't erased this place, hadn't erased me from the place. I was there in the field picking blackberries. I was there in the cemetery, some of my names engraved on barely legible white stones. I was there in that hospital breathing up and down with my father. At a time in my life when I feared everyone I loved would leave me, I came back to myself. I carried my handful of berries back to the house before the mother bear and her 2 cubs caught me pilfering, or before old man Gajowski's ghost floated from the pigsty to tell me it was time, while the sun still shone, to forgive my father. Okay. This next one, I was related to everyone, I think, in this town. I remember when I went away to college at Allegheny, I was so surprised I didn't know anybody. And then found this wonderful group of friends. This next one, and I had many great aunts and uncles, and I would go to their houses after school. This one was out in Louisville Review, I think maybe 1917. This is my Uncle Forrest. He had gone blind and his wife had died, but I enjoyed visiting him. To Uncle Forrest's house. Autumn afternoons I walked there, past Miss Besselman's shed. Someone said our principal slept with the handyman, and whiffs of sin clinging to her like perfume. I slowed to see her tethered pony, delaying my knock on his door. It was always dark in the parlor, faint odor of urine in the corners, mincing lace covered the chairs. His wife had been dead for years. I had feared her. She was stern, her mouth a dry, narrow blade. Why hadn't Hazel gone blind? No one had told me that life was unfair. When books came out on records, Forrest rocked, living in stories. Shakespeare's floor of heaven inlaid with patines of gold, the Psalms, light with mine eyes has gone from me. After my visits, I went home and practiced being blind, shutting my closet door, listening to a needle orbit the dark. How am I doing on my time, Sandy?
Go for up to 5 more minutes, Susan.
Okay.
I'm just drawing
Okay. All right. Let me do just a couple more. I think I won't do this long one. I'll put it, okay. This next one, my great uncle who lived next door. This was in Weber Studies. This is called Digging Rutabagas. In autumn, earthy, tart, a cold crop. It tasted good with horseradish spread, my uncle told me. I feared I wouldn't like them, but I didn't tell him that. Instead, I asked him why he put forked sticks between the apple branches. Paper hanger by day, he knew the town's houses intimately from their colors and patterns. He moved among their owners' narrow lives with a lover's tenderness. He gave me his scraps, flocks, stripes, chintzes for a dollhouse I made from a cardboard box. Sometimes I pretended the box was my house, and in that house of scraps, my mother and father laughed and touched. When I was 13, I wanted to know things I couldn't find in books, not even my biology text, so I watched him often. He wasn't married like the other grown-ups. When I peered out my stair window late at night, I could see his lamp burning, up reading Playboy, the neighbors gossiped. Or is that what I remember, they said. It's been so long. Years afterward, trying to write a sonnet for someone I'd lost, I made myself a rutabaga sandwich. It left a bitter taste. It didn't go away. Okay, I'll just do two more shorter ones. This next one, based on the snapshot I found not long ago of myself in front of the house. This is called Word Perfect. In this black and white snapshot, it's not yet spring. The branches on the shrubs flanking the house are at the dark end of the value scale, the white of the clown shoe next to me at the light end. Concrete steps rise behind me, shadowed obstacles guarding the house. I am in overalls, short sleeves, and there's no snow on the ground. I think it is 1950. I have just turned 3. My mouth opens wide. I appear to be screaming, possibly in delight, as I balance a large book on my lap. My hair lifts and curls above my moon-shaped face, my eyes staring hard at the catalpa tree, which is just beyond the frame. I already know who I will be. Reader, writer, loud chronicler of the ones absent from the photo, the others whose histories it will take me a lifetime to record. Okay, this is the one.
Why don't you read a couple more? Why don't you read a couple more? We have several.
All right, well, I've got 2 more here.
Or
so
3.
Should I read them?
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Okay, now I put it away. Okay, I'll read this question. This, again, another this is called Stella. It was out in Semaphore, I think. When I think about her, which isn't often anymore, I hear her jangling laugh and see that brassy hair twisted at the nape of her neck. It's not as though I didn't care for her. After all, she was my uncle's wife, but she was different from us Swedes. Her maiden name was Gajowski. I couldn't even say it. We saw her father drunk every Friday night, standing in front of the Polish club. Every weekday afternoon, Stella pulled on her white gloves and drove her Ford to town, where she wandered through the 5 and 10's musty aisles, her spiked heels tapping on those worn wooden floors. Her lips shone bright red, like a circus clown's or Marilyn Monroe's. I overheard my mother whisper at the ice cream social that Stella's skirts were too tight. Others must have thought so, because all the men watched her as she walked down Main Street. One night when I was asleep in my cousin Janie's bedroom, I woke to hear the screen door slam. It was my uncle. I heard him shouting at Stella, but I couldn't hear her answer. What could she have said? After all, she was Polish, and he grew up on Sweet Hill. I heard the sound of glass breaking, and finally someone cried. Was it my cousin or me? When she told us years later she wished she had been a nun, I didn't believe her. But now, when I think of how it all ended, my uncle dying of cirrhosis at 50, Stella dry-eyed beside his bed, still wearing that painted smile, I think the silence of convents might have healed her. Okay, so I'll end with this one. And this is the one poem I was able to write this year. And it sometimes, like the poem I read about my grandmother losing a little boy, it took me like 3 months to write, and I must have written 1,000,000 words. This one I just was able to sit down and write it. I'm lucky. I have 5 grandchildren, 2 in the area, 3 in Atlanta that I will hopefully see now. But I do some sewing projects with my granddaughter here, which is wonderful. This is called Sewing the World Together. I fear your blank is beyond repair. unraveling, stained, its thread count in the single digits. But I sense we have to try. It's more than just its bubblegum spots, its jagged seams, its off-gray color. It's your stay against this world, against these monochromatic days punctuated with flashing red lights, octagonal stop signs, those florid orange cones screaming, danger, proceed with caution. Nearly everything equals danger now. The slightest pinky linking, sweet voices raised in song, even a casual summer sneeze. We're hemmed in, so what can we do to make things right? We pin the blankies for hems together, thread our needles. You're good at it, while my shaky fingers struggle to line up thread and eye. I can make knots, but then I remember how my grandmother licked her forefinger to form hers. There's an orange cone for you. Should I wash my hands after each knot, make you wash yours, or show you how to push your golden needle through again and again in the same spot, back stitches? We chatter as our needles run along the blanket sprayed edges, binding them together, talking without bitterness of what we know of the world, taking on the endless work of mending it, one tiny white stitch at a time.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm going to invite everyone to unmute.
Hey, wonderful. Yes.
Hey.
That was a terrific reading. Just like want to meet all of the people in your poems. They're just
Thank
so
you.
interesting.
I feel like we have met those people.
We have just a little taste. Now I want to get to know them more.